used to work for our founder, Miss Brenda. And before she started Lovelady, she owned a bunch of different businesses. She had a mortgage and tax office and training company, jewelry, I mean, just all kinds of different things. And I actually stole $50,000 from her and got away with it, and then got in trouble again. And by the way, I went all the way to Florida to get away from everything. And when I got in trouble in Florida, the judge court-ordered me all the way back to Birmingham, Alabama, to the ministry that Miss Brenda had opened up called the Lovelady Center. And so that's how I got involved at Lovelady.
What made you think stealing 50,000 bucks was a good idea?
Well, so I was in an abusive situation. My husband, I guess I kind of need to start from the very beginning to kind of make everything come together. But so I was born in Morris, Alabama, which is kind of out towards the boonies, or the country, and I am the oldest of three. And my mom and my father married young, and my father's family was in the moonshine business, but my grandfather was very abusive to him and his sisters and brothers. And then my mother was also abused severely. Her family was in like an occult. And so my mom always had these mental issues and spent most of my childhood in the mental home, or when she would come home, she really wouldn't know who we were because she had shock therapy back in those days. They would do that, and she wouldn't really know who we were or anything. So I just became my two younger sisters' providers and protectors, and so I did whatever it took to take care of them. And so I kind of got that mentality of surviving and doing whatever I had to do to be able to do whatever we needed. My father began sexually abusing me at the age of 7. I was very mortified and felt very unworthy and very unloved. I didn't understand how a supposedly father could hurt a child that way. And when my mom, the thing about being mentally ill is when she was doing good, she would take us to church, because my mom loved the Lord. She loved God so much, but she just could never get over all of those horrible things that she went through growing up. And so when I would go to church with her, I would hear what everybody would tell me about Jesus and God, but when we would go home, we would live a totally different life. And so it made me have a lot of hard feelings and anger towards God, and didn't understand why He would let all these things happen to me and my sisters, or even to my mom. At the age of 14, I finally told my mom about the abuse. I had watched a show on TV back in the day. It was called Punky Brewster. And for the first time, I felt like maybe there was somebody else out there had gone through what I had gone through. And I worked up the courage to tell my mom. And so we packed up all of our stuff, and we basically moved to Georgia for the summer. And while I was there, it was my first time to ever actually be able to be a real kid and enjoy life and not have to worry about the things that I had worried about for so long. After that summer came over, my mom packed our stuff back up, and we started heading back to Alabama. And when we got to Alabama, we stopped by my mom's church. And as we walked in, I could smell my father's cologne, and I knew that he was there inside that building, and they walked me around the corner, and there was 12 men sitting around a large table, and my father was at the other end by them. And they proceeded to tell me that, my dad had gotten saved, and that he had stopped drinking, and that they didn't think that he would ever abuse us anymore. And due to my mom's mental illness, that it was best that we went back home. And so there again, I just felt very unworthy, and now more people knew my secret that I never wanted to tell anyone. And I just became even more angry, and at that time I started using marijuana with friends to just kind of escape. And I come up with a plan. Me and my plans always get me in trouble somehow. But I was going to run away with my sisters and, figure a way to take care of us. And so I had told one of my friends, and she had told me about a gentleman who lived in Boyer and had some studio apartments, and I could live there with my sisters and then work at some of his different businesses that he had. I was so excited and just grateful. And then after I moved in, he kind of informed me on what kind of businesses that he ran. And so it would be expected of me to have dates with older men in order to pay for my stay. And you think, like, why would a 14-year-old agree to do that? But in my mind, finally, I was getting to make my own choice about my own body, of what I was going to do or not going to do. And if it was a way that I could take care of my sisters, then I would do that. We had an agreement that they would never know and that no one would ever bother them. And so I lived that life till I think I was about 19. And got pregnant with my first child. And after I got pregnant, I was like, I want to be different. I want to give my child a different life. I didn't want to be anything like my mother was. I wanted to, have my children to where they never had to worry about food or somebody hurting them, and that all they had was happiness to think about. And so I got out of that life. I actually had to move into public housing, but to me it was better than living the way I was living. And I got 2 jobs. I was working at the grocery store in Gardendale and the Crystals while I was pregnant, and I had my sisters with me. I met a guy, and all I ever wanted in my life was to be loved, and he seemed to want to give me that love, and so I quickly jumped into a marriage with him. And I thought that, I was finally going to have my happy ever after. My baby sister moved in with a friend, my middle sister got married, and she was having a baby. And I thought everything was going to be great. But happily ever after did not last very long, because my husband, he began to cheat on me on a regular basis. I mean, I didn't even know a person could cheat that many times. But it was like he cheated on me with everybody, and it didn't matter if they were prettier than me or smarter than me. He really didn't have I don't know what you would call it, but yeah, a bar. He just, whoever would do it, and he was up for it. And so, which just made my self-esteem feel even worse. And I didn't think I could feel any worse than that, but he definitely put me there. After, a year of going through, the different women calling me and showing up and this and that, I decided to make him leave. But our home was on his family's land, and so they made it really hard for me to stay there. They turned off my water because it was all tied in together somehow, and my utilities and stuff. So during this time, my mom, she had always been a self-mutilator and had attempted to commit suicide many times through my life. In fact, when we would come home from school, I would make my little sister stand outside, and I would go in because I never knew what I was like walking into. And so in '99, my mom finally succeeded and she committed suicide. So not only was I going through the divorce, but then my mom was also gone too. And so within 2 months, my best friend also died from drugs. And her husband, he had 3 children, and I had 2. And he worked at nighttime, and I worked during the day, and I just really needed to get away from my husband's family. And so I asked him if I could move in, and I would help him babysit, and he would help me babysit. And so we moved in together, and for the first time in my life, I had a relationship with a man that wasn't abusive, it wasn't sexual. He just really became my best friend. And I felt as though I was falling in love with him, but I never thought that he would love me because my best friend was very beautiful and small and tiny. And through my divorce and stuff, so I had given up drugs, given up men. So the only other addiction that I thought I could go to was food. So I started eating a lot of food and was weighing over 400 pounds. Or close to 400 pounds. But he would always tell me that I was so beautiful, and I don't think he ever saw me as being that big. But one day, I'll never forget that we were standing there, and we kind of had an argument because he was supposed to babysit for me, and he got upset or whatever, didn't want to babysit. And he told me that he was in love with me. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I just felt like I was just won the lottery or something, because my whole life I had never trusted a man. I had never even really liked a man. Even though I married my first husband, it was just because I felt like he would have been a good father to my children. And this time I had like really fallen in love. And we had the best relationship starting out, and he was my best friend. I mean, I remember like the first time we were just playing around the house before he ever told me he loved me, and he tickled me. And it was like my first time to ever be tickled, that wasn't like a dirty tickle, it was just a funny tickle, and he would always tell me that I was the most beautifulest person, and I would catch him looking at me. I was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm just looking at you because you're so beautiful." And I would just get so embarrassed by it and stuff, but he just made me feel like that I was beautiful, and he made me feel like the prettiest woman in the world, for real. But we had a great relationship, and my husband's like a perfectionist, and so he was helping one of his friends, and he fell and ended up getting frontal lobe damage to the brain and broke some bones. And so they put him on pain medication. And so he was in a lot of pain and stuff. And he went from never really doing drugs or even taking Tylenols to becoming a hardcore addict. And so the more drugs that he did, the worse that he got and the angrier that he got. And so at this time, I was going to school because I wanted to be a chemist pharmacist, because I wanted to find some medicine or a cure to help with mental illness, because now we had discovered that my youngest sister also suffered from the same mental illness that my mom had. And I just didn't want her to live and have the life that my mom had to go through. I went to my professor and told her that I was going to have to drop out of school because we couldn't afford to live anymore because Bubba couldn't work at that time. And she suggested that I go see Miss Brenda Lovelady's mom, the owner of the Lovelady, which she didn't own Lovelady then, but she owned a bunch of different companies, and she's like, you're really smart with numbers, and I think that you'll be great there, because I kind of have a way with numbers in my mom. And so I went to her office, and so I really didn't have any clothes, because all the money that I did have I spent on our kids. And I remember that I was in Army fatigues, and my boots were safety pinned together, and my hair had not been cut in probably 5 years, and I was just probably looking pretty sad. And I showed up at her office, and all these people were like kind of making fun of me because they asked me, I was there for a job. And back in those days, they had the little window for the fax machine, and so everybody kept coming to the fax machine to kind of, can you believe this girl wants a job here? But I stayed, and I sat there all day long waiting on Miss Brenda to see me. And so finally, when she came, it was the end of the day, and I'll never forget that day because it was in November, it was cold, and it was nasty outside. And she just took one look at me, and she was like, I'm sorry, I can't give you a job. It just, I don't know what you would do, and I don't have anything for you. And so as I left, I was like totally heartbroken. And the car that I was driving, I had to take the battery cables off of the car, because if I didn't, then it would run my battery down. And so it was raining, and I was trying to put the battery cable back on the car so I could get out of there. And I heard her yell, wait a minute. And she came out in the rain, and I looked at her like she was crazy, because she was kind of like I thought maybe she thought I took something or something, And she was like, God told me to give you a job. And I was like, God told you to give me a job? Are you sure about that? And I was like, because me and God, we really don't get along, and he doesn't like me, and he's not really, because I believed in him. I just didn't think that I was anywhere close to being anywhere his favorite or anybody that he liked. And she's like, yes. She said, God told me, so do you want the job? And I was like, yes, I want the job. And so she was like, be here in the morning. And so I remember coming to work. I didn't actually know what I was going to do, but I got up really early, and I was trying to beat her into the office, but I did not beat her there. She was already sitting in the parking lot waiting on me. And so when I pulled up, she rolled down the window, and she was like, get in the car. And I'm like, where are we going? She's like, we're going to just get in here. And so we ended up going shopping. And so she bought me all new clothes and got my hair done and my nails done, and just really just made me feel very beautiful and wonderful. And she said, you're going to be my receptionist. And I was thinking, receptionist? Okay, that's great. Any job is great. And so within a couple of weeks, I ended up being her and her husband's right-hand person. So I went from having nothing to making, over $100,000 a year, handling their mortgages, their buying houses, fixing them up, flipping them, doing the insurance, taxes, any and everything that they needed me to do. Then I was handling it and doing that part for them. And so everything seemed to be going wonderful in my life anymore, and had lots of money, so you would think I would finally have my happiness. But my home life was going bad, and the better that I got, the worse that Bubba got. And so this wonderful, loving man that was my best friend became 10 times worse to me than my dad ever was. And Miss Brenda even added on a room at the office so that I could bring my kids there. And I worked like 80 hours or more. That might be exaggerating a little bit, but it was a lot of hours. And the kids would come with me after school, and they would, I would do their work with them and stuff, and we would eat there. And so basically, we were just going home to bathe and sleep. But at nighttime, he would keep me up all night, and he would attack me in my sleep, or dump water on me, or drag me out of bed and stuff. And so it was like I wasn't really getting any rest, or really just becoming mentally exhausted, because the more that I was doing for Miss Brenda, the less sleep I was getting at home, and the abuse was just getting worse. And so Miss Brenda had came to be like my mom, because I just always wanted a mom that was there for me and that I could talk to. And since my mom was gone, she just kind of fit into that place. And so I went to her asking her for help with my husband, but she really didn't have time to help me, because she had started to open up the Lovelady Center, and she had brought the first set of women into her home, and they had grew quickly to where I think she had about 20 or so. And so now she no longer had time for me, and I just felt very unworthy again and very unloved. And she would tell me to leave Bubba, but I would be like, but I know that there's this person that I fell in love with that was absolutely amazing, that I just needed to figure out how to get him back out. But she didn't want to help me figure that out. She just wanted me to kick him to the curb and then go on. But for some reason I couldn't. So I came up with my own plan again. So here's how my plans get me in trouble. And I knew that they were going out of town for Thanksgiving, and I asked her for a $50,000 check that I needed to buy a house. And I went and cashed that check, and me and my kids and my husband moved to Florida. So I thought that she would be okay with it. I was sadly mistaken. She's a redhead, she's very fiery, and she pressed charges on me. And so I ended up going to court, and they ended up dropping those charges, or won those charges, or however it happened. But I took that money and I started my own business, and I was doing really good. I was making even more money than I was making with Miss Brenda, and stuff that Bubba had promised me that if I would leave Miss Brenda, that he would get help. And so that he didn't. He would not go get help. He just got worse, and I was making more money so he could buy more stuff. And so me and my children, we just began to travel and do different projects in different states. And so we, had a happy time for them, but in my life I was still so miserable, because I was just missing something. Nothing that men could feel, nothing that drugs could feel, that money could feel, that success could feel. I just had this emptiness, or even a mother could feel. There was something I was yearning for, but I didn't know what it was. But I just felt like I just felt empty without this, whatever it was that I needed, and I could never quite figure out what it was. And so when the real estate market crashed, I ended up losing everything that we had, and basically had to go back home to my husband. And now we were having to live in some apartments that one of my investor friends owned, who did tax credits. And in apartments, you can't hide the abuse, because everybody can hear everything. And so basically I became the laughing joke of the apartments, because everybody would hear all the things that Bubba would say and do to me at night when I would go home. I had ended up letting a lady move into these apartments before she qualified, because she had told me a story and I believed her. And so she ended up blackmailing me, and because I had altered paperwork, because what she told me wasn't true, and I couldn't get her to move. And so she had another friend to come in, and she wanted me to do the same for her that I had done for her. And I had just been so broken and so beaten down. I was just like, no, I'm calling my boss now. I'm telling her what I did, and if she fires me or whatever. And I called her, and of course she fired me. So I had to go home. And that night, me and Bubba had one of our worst fights. And, not saying that all of our fights were his fault, because growing up I learned like the only way to handle anger was I would fight back. And so when my dad would be on one of his violent tantrums, I would try to keep him off my sisters by just attacking him back and forth until either he gave up or he knocked me out. And so when it came time with arguing with Bubba, I still had that same mentality because I didn't know how to control my own anger, much less his anger. And so one of the neighbors called DHR, and I lost my children. And there is no words or feelings to explain that pain. It was worse than any abuse I had ever experienced. It was like every fiber, every cell of my body was screaming no, but there was really nothing that I could do about it. And I remember them screaming and me crying, and then they were gone. And then it all of a sudden hit me like a ton of bricks that I had become everything that I hated in my mom. That I had chosen a man over my children. And even though he didn't abuse my children, it was abused by them having to sit and experience our fighting and our abusive ways. And I made these promises to myself that I would never, let my children go through anything that I had gone through, and that I would never want to die and never think of, commit suicide or tell my children that I wanted to die or anything like that. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to die. And I remember sitting there, because my whole life I'd always talked to God in my mind. And I was like, are you happy, God? You've broke me to the broken point to where I can't be broken anymore. You took the one thing that I loved more than anything, which was my children. Couldn't you at least just let me have my children? And, I just was at that breaking point to where I just didn't want to live anymore. And so when the police came to get me and stuff, because the lady that had been blackmailing me, her friend said that I had stolen $8,000 from her in cash, that she was going to pay for her rent for a year, which this time was absolutely not true. I did not take that woman's money. But when we went to court, the judge asked me, he said, Ms. Smith, did you do this? And I told him, I said, no, sir, I did not take this woman's money, but I stole from the lady. I stole $50,000 from her. She was like a mother to me, and I hurt her very bad. And so I guess this is my punishment for what I had done. But really, I don't care what you do with me, because they took my children, and I don't think I'm ever going to get them back. And he sat there, and he looked at me for a long time, and I was like, why does he keep looking at me? But he's like, you know what, Ms. Smith? He said, I see something different in you. And he's like, we've had a lot of success out of a program in Birmingham, and that's where your children are going. And so I think we're going to send you there. And when he said Birmingham, I kind of thought, oh God, no, he is going to send me to the Lovelady Center. But it was just too much to think that could really happen. But then out of his mouth, he said, we're going to send you to a place called the Lovelady Center. Have you heard of it? I was like, oh my God, no, Judge. And I stood up. I was like, you cannot send me there. I mean, he's looking at me like I've done lost my mind. But I was like, I stole $50,000 from that lady, and I got away with it. And she's a redhead, and she's fiery, and there is no way in a million years years that she is ever going to let me come into that program. And if she does, it will only be to punish me. And I'm like, my life has been hard enough. I've been through all this stuff. Can you please just find somewhere else to send me? And he starts laughing. And I'm like, what is so funny? And he was like, God has a sense of humor. And I'm like, oh no. But in my mind, I thought, because he said he was going to call and ask Miss Brenda if I could come there, I just knew she would say no automatically. And so when he called Miss Brenda, she did say no at first, but she was like, he called her and he said, I need to talk to you about a lady that I need to send into your program. And she's like, oh, just tell her to come on, send her on. And he was like, no, I need to tell you about her. And she's like, if she hasn't done any violent or sexual abuse, she can come on. And he's like, well, her name is Stephenie Smith. And he said there was complete silence on the phone. And if you know Miss Brenda, it's hard to make her go silent. So she was like, do what? Stephenie Smith? My Stephenie Smith? The Stephenie Smith that I treated as a daughter, that I loved with all my heart, that stole my money? And he's like, yeah, she told me about that. And she's like, well, she can't come here. And he said, well, I'm going to give you till in the morning to think about it. And so that night and that day, which Lindsay in the back was actually my first client rep I ever had. But so she was like so mad and told everybody she is not coming here. Can y'all believe she wants to come here? I didn't want to come there, but they were going to send me there. And so that night, she said that, she began to argue and battle with the Lord because she felt like he was telling her that I needed to come there, that she didn't want me there. And she said it was basically like he said, what's the difference between Stephenie and the other women in your program? They've all hurt their family, they've all stolen, and you expect their family to forgive them. So if, you can't forgive Stephenie, then I can't forgive you. And so that next morning, bright and early, she was ringing my judge's phone off the hook and told me to come in. And so he was like, we already have her on our way. She'll be there by 3. And so I remember coming in and I was so nervous and I was so shameful and just broken and, I really wouldn't even look anybody in the eye. And I was told to not have any communication with anyone in the family, Miss Brenda, Melinda, nobody, that I was just to get in, do the program, and get out. And so as I'm sitting in my room, I hear them to start paging me to come to her office. And I'm like, this is a setup. She's brought me all this way, just to get her revenge and to send me back. And so I'm honestly, truthfully thinking about running. And Lindsay walks in my room and she's like, we've been paging you to the office. And I'm like, I know, I heard you, but I was told by my judge that I'm not to have anything at all to do with them. And she's like, well, she has changed her mind, so you need to come with me. And so when I walked into her room, there was a bunch of people in there, and there was an empty chair, which Lindsay pointed out was for me. And so I went and sat in that chair, and I remember looking down and afraid to look up at anybody, but I saw her stand up and come around the desk, and I thought, oh my goodness, she has brought me in here in front of all these people, and she was about to choke me out, and there's nothing I could do about it because she has all these witnesses, and I'm really going to be in it, and this is going to be horrible. But when she told me to stand up, and when I stood up, she gave me the biggest hug and told me that she loved me and she forgave me. And I just couldn't understand why she would even want to love me or forgive me after I'd hurt her so bad. And she was like, but Stephenie, you're going to have to get this Jesus thing. And this Jesus thing, I told her, I said, I'll do whatever I have to do to get my kids back, Brenda, but I don't have to have your Jesus. I'll go to the classes, I'll do the work, but me and Jesus, we just don't get along and stuff. And so I started going to the classes, and it was so crazy because I couldn't figure out everybody's angle. Like, why were they telling me they love me, and why were they being so nice, and why were they wanting to hug? I remember there was one teacher, like, she would chase me down just to hug me, and I didn't like to be touched. I didn't like to be hugged, but she wanted to hug me every week. I knew she was going to go hunt me down no matter. I couldn't hide from her. It was like she had radar or something. And they would, come every week and they would teach us things. And, I started listening to the things that they were saying and started believing what they were saying. And we have a morning devotion at the Lovelady Center. And we have church and stuff all the time. And we have this amazing praise and worship. And I remember when the girls would be singing and I would hear the music, I would have this like huge tugging in my heart. And it was just like I just wanted to run. I didn't know where I was running to or where I was going, but it's like I just wanted to get up and run to something. But I would never do it. In fact, sometimes I would put my fingers in my ears and try to block out the music and everything because I didn't want to feel that way. I ended up getting my 3 kids back, or my husband's 3 kids back before I got my 2. And my little girl, she ended up going to a camp, and it was called King's Kids Camp. And she was just came back from camp, and she was so excited. And she had the most beautiful glow on her face that I had ever seen. And she was just bouncing up and down, and she was like, Mom, you're not going to believe what happened at camp. And I was like, what is it, baby? And she's like, I got saved. Well, I had tried to keep my children from anything that had to do with God or Jesus because I felt like that it would just set them up to believe in things that weren't true and that wouldn't help them. So my first automatic reaction was I wanted to tell her no, that it's not real and stuff, but she was just so happy. And she just came to me and she, grabbed my hands in her hands and she said, but Mom, you haven't heard the best part of all this. And I was like, what is it, baby? And she's like, what God has done for me, He can do for you. And she's like, I know that you feel these ways. And my child started telling me ways that I had felt and things I had said to God that I'd really not said to anybody. And then she started quoting scripture to me and that I knew from growing up in church, but I didn't know how she would know those scriptures. And she said, I've got to know, Mom, will you accept Jesus in your heart? Will you let Him change you and make a difference? And I did. And so in my room 411, my little 8-year-old led me to the Lord, which would have not been possible unless all the wonderful teachers had taught me things and I had learned things because I had heard certain things that I didn't understand them growing up, but they started making things more clear to me as I sat under their teaching. I started crying. And I hadn't cried in so long, it was like I just couldn't stop crying. And so it was like after I found Jesus, the cute little cat, oh, that's such a beautiful cat. And it was like the more that I cried and the more it was just like He was just filling me up. And this emptiness that I tried to fill with money and men and success and drugs and food and a mother and so many other things that could never, even my children, I could never feel this emptiness. He filled it. He filled every bit of it. It was overflowing. And so the person that I was before was, angry, mad, and was all about myself and my family. And now He had changed me to where now I have all these women and children that I worry about and concerned over. And I believe that God's purpose the whole time was for me to be part of the Lovelady Center. But my hard-headedness took me in another direction and in many other directions. But He was always making my way back home to do what He had called me to do. And so at Lovelady, all the women, they're basically just like me. Some went to church, some didn't go to church. Most of them have suffered some type of abuse. They're, angry at their families. They're angry at their self. They're angry at God, But we all have, one thing in common, and that's the need for a relationship with our Lord Jesus. And at Lovelady Center, we give them the access to Him. We teach them how to have a wonderful relationship with Him. When I came to the center, I didn't change overnight, but I spent a lot of time reading His Word and praying and just building this relationship with Him. And as I began to build this relationship with Him, it dawned on me that, every time I did sin, that it was like I was crucifying Him myself all over again. And I, fell in love with Jesus, and I don't want to hurt Him anymore. So I try to do right and to live right to the best that I can, because I think of all that He did and He's done for me. I just love Him, and people think how horrible of a life that I've had, but everything that I've gone through allows me to do what I do, and for me to be able to understand where these women and children come from. I can relate with their pain. I can relate with their having a hard time forgiving people and their anger. I had to take anger management 4 times before I got out of that class. And I'm a straight A student. I couldn't understand the reason why I couldn't get out of that class, but He just, I'm his art, I guess, and He works on me every day, and He molds me to what He wants me to be. And it's an honor to be able to serve Him at Lovelady, and to be able to use my testimony for people to see, what's really going on at Lovelady, that God is there, and, it's not one person that pours into our lives. There's so many. We have over 60 different classes every 6 weeks, and we have different pastors and teachers that come in and minister to us. We have prayer groups. We have people that volunteer. We have people that donate. So everybody there is planting seeds in our life that is changing us. And it's not just me, so it falls to my children and then to my family, and it's spreading out like a beautiful tree, a beautiful flower bush. It just keeps growing. So that's my story.